The Vicks had always considered themselves the pinnacle of evolution. For centuries, they had dominated the galaxy with their cutting-edge technology, plasma weapons capable of incinerating entire fleets, energy shields impenetrable by any known weapon, and nanotech-based warships that could adapt to any threat. So, when they stumbled upon a small blue planet in a remote corner of the galaxy, their reaction was immediate and dismissive. Earth was primitive. Its inhabitants still used fossil fuels, relied on combustion engines, and most laughably, still flew mechanical fighter jets. To the Vicks, humanity was a relic of a less evolved age. The Vicks Military Council convened, not out of necessity, but almost as an afterthought. Their real focus was on larger conquests, distant empires that might pose a challenge. Earth? Earth was nothing more than an inconvenience. Commander Vrax stood before his peers, his expression one of mild amusement. He projected holographic images of Earth's fighter jets onto the council chamber walls, their crude metal frames flying against the backdrop of blue skies. "Look at this," he scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. "They're still using combustion to propel themselves through the air. How quaint." The council members chuckled, nodding in agreement. For them, Earth was not even worthy of being called a battlefield. It would be, as Vrax put it, a brief demonstration of their superiority, a warning to other civilizations that might be watching. "We could send a single ship," Vrax continued, "just to toy with them. It'll be over before their primitive minds can even comprehend what's happening." But not everyone in the room was so quick to dismiss. A younger officer, Lieutenant Call, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He wasn't convinced that such arrogance was wise. The galaxy was vast, and history had shown that underestimating an opponent, no matter how seemingly insignificant, was a dangerous mistake. He cleared his throat, drawing a few eyes. "Commander," Call began cautiously, "perhaps we should not be so quick to dismiss them. We've never encountered their kind before. They could be unpredictable." Vrax turned to Call, amusement turning to irritation. "Unpredictable?" he repeated mockingly. "Lieutenant, their greatest achievement is launching metal into the air and hoping it doesn't fall back down. They're about as unpredictable as a falling rock." The room burst into laughter. Call fell silent, realizing his words carried no weight in the face of such confidence. The council's decision was final. They would send a fleet, not for necessity, but for spectacle. A few battleships would descend on Earth, eradicate any semblance of resistance, and leave the planet in ruins. It was an exercise in domination, a reminder to the galaxy that the Vicks were invincible. As the meeting adjourned, Vrax couldn't resist one last jab. "Let's see how long their jets last against plasma cannons. I'd wager seconds." Despite the council's consensus, Call couldn't shake his unease. The humans were an unknown quantity, and in war, the unknown often held the most danger. But his concerns were ignored, and soon the Vicks fleet was preparing to descend upon Earth. In the days leading up to the invasion, Vrax relished the anticipation. He imagined the humans' faces, if they were even capable of understanding what was about to happen, as their jets, these relics of a bygone era, were swatted from the sky like flies. He could already see the headlines across the galaxy: "The Vicks crush another world." It was a game to him, one that he was certain would end in a quick and decisive victory. As the fleet embarked on its journey, Vrax allowed himself a moment of reflection. "Primitive creatures," he muttered to himself. "I almost feel sorry for them. Almost." He smirked, confident that by this time tomorrow, Earth would be a smoldering ruin, its people nothing more than a footnote in the Vicks' long history of conquest. But as the fleet crossed into Earth's atmosphere, the first hints of resistance began to emerge. Far below, human fighter jets scrambled, rising to meet the Vicks warships. To Vrax, it was almost comical, as if ants were trying to fight a storm. He leaned back in his command chair, watching the spectacle with amusement. "Begin the assault," he ordered lazily, barely sparing the screen a glance. He was already thinking about their next target, assuming Earth would fall within minutes. What he couldn't know, what none of the Vicks could know, was that humanity had spent centuries perfecting the art of survival. They had faced impossible odds before, and while their weapons may have seemed primitive, their ingenuity and resolve were anything but. Earth's military command was the first to detect the approaching fleet. Deep space monitors, designed to pick up any anomalies, went wild as hundreds of unidentified vessels appeared on their screens. It wasn't long before they realized the truth: Earth was under attack. Alien ships, far more advanced than anything humanity had ever seen, were on a direct course toward the planet. The Vicks had arrived. In the control rooms of Earth's air bases, alarms blared. Commanders scrambled to coordinate a response, knowing full well the gravity of the situation. Fighter jets were prepped for immediate takeoff, pilots rushing to their stations. Despite the urgency, a palpable tension filled the air. Everyone had seen the readings. The enemy's ships were colossal, bristling with technology that was far beyond anything humans could produce. Plasma weapons, energy shields, things they had only imagined in science fiction. Captain Reynolds, a seasoned pilot with years of combat experience, suited up in silence. He knew the odds were against them, but the thought of not fighting didn't even cross his mind. His squadron had been briefed on the Vicks' capabilities, and it wasn't pretty. Every indicator suggested the alien invaders had the upper hand in every conceivable way: firepower, speed, defense. But humans had fought against impossible odds before, and this time wouldn't be any different. Reynolds steadied his breathing, mentally preparing for what could be his last flight. As he stepped onto the tarmac, he glanced up at the sky. Above him, the first glimmers of the Vicks ships were breaking through the atmosphere. Massive, shimmering with alien energy fields, they looked like gods descending from the heavens. There was no panic in his eyes, only determination. His jet was ready, and so was he. The command came through: scramble. In seconds, the roar of engines filled the air as dozens of fighter jets lifted off, streaking into the sky. On the ground, everyone watched with a mixture of hope and dread, knowing this first encounter would determine everything. If the jets couldn't stop the Vicks, no one could. The Vicks fleet continued its slow descent, confident in their superiority. Energy shields hummed to life, wrapping the massive ships in a glowing barrier. From the Vicks' perspective, it was laughable that Earth had even attempted a defense. These mechanical contraptions, these jets, were little more than toys to them. The Vicks commanders, watching the humans' pathetic attempts to engage, couldn't help but sneer. "Let them come," one commander said, grinning. "Their technology is ancient. They won't last a minute." The first dogfights erupted as Earth's jets closed the distance. Vicks plasma cannons fired off bright, destructive pulses, each one meant to vaporize anything in its path. But something unexpected happened. Instead of being obliterated in seconds, the human jets darted and weaved through the fire. They weren't destroyed, they were evading. Captain Reynolds pulled his jet into a sharp dive, narrowly avoiding a blast that would have torn his aircraft apart. He flipped the jet into a barrel roll, skimming just above the treetops as another pulse exploded behind him. His hands gripped the controls tightly, every move calculated, every second a fight to stay alive. It wasn't just him. His entire squadron moved with precision, working together, coordinating their attacks. The Vicks, for all their technological superiority, hadn't anticipated this. Their ships were built for raw power, overwhelming enemies with sheer firepower and advanced shielding. But they had never faced anything like human fighter pilots, unpredictable, resourceful, and relentless. The Vicks' automated targeting systems struggled to keep up with the speed and agility of the jets, missing shot after shot. Reynolds pushed his jet into a steep climb, breaking through a wall of plasma fire. His squadron followed, spreading out in all directions, making themselves harder targets. With a flick of a switch, he armed his missiles. They weren't designed for energy shields, but that didn't matter now. The goal was to distract, to frustrate the enemy, to buy time. They were fighting a war of attrition. The first missile fired, streaking toward a Vicks ship. As expected, the missile collided with the energy shield and detonated harmlessly. The Vicks commander laughed at the futility of the attack. But Reynolds wasn't done. A second missile followed, then a third. His squadron did the same, launching wave after wave of fire. The shields held, but the Vicks ships began to slow. On the ground, commanders watched in awe. The jets weren't just surviving, they were holding their own. For every plasma shot that came from the Vicks, the jets were there, weaving through the chaos, launching counterattacks. No one had expected the battle to last this long. The Vicks, growing frustrated, adjusted their tactics. A barrage of plasma bolts rained down, lighting up the sky. But the jets were fast. They split into smaller formations, using the terrain below to their advantage. The human pilots dipped into valleys, skimmed the surface of the ocean, anything to avoid being hit. The Vicks ships, lumbering and massive, struggled to keep pace. Back in his cockpit, Reynolds could feel the tension rising. His fuel was running low, and his jet had taken a few glancing blows, but they weren't beaten yet. He glanced at his radar. More Vicks ships were entering the atmosphere. They were sending reinforcements. He knew this was just the beginning, but something had shifted. The Vicks weren't laughing anymore. They had underestimated Earth, and now, for the first time, they were facing a real fight. Reynolds gripped the controls tighter, ready for the next round. The first encounter wasn't over, and humanity wasn't backing down. The Vicks commanders, watching from their command ships, could hardly believe their eyes. The primitive human fighter jets, little more than relics in their eyes, should have been obliterated by now. Yet, here they were, darting around their plasma fire, outmaneuvering their automated defenses. Frustration turned into disbelief as each carefully calculated volley missed its mark. Their targeting systems, designed to deal with far more advanced enemies, were baffled by the erratic, almost chaotic patterns of the human pilots. One commander barked orders to recalibrate the targeting algorithms. Surely this was just a matter of adjusting their systems. They were the Vicks, the most advanced species in the known galaxy. Their warships had never met an equal. But each adjustment they made seemed to have little effect. Every time a jet was locked onto, it would dive, roll, or split off in a way that defied their models. The Vicks had always relied on predictability, on their superior technology rendering enemies powerless before them. But these humans were different. They didn't fight by the rules the Vicks were used to. On the human side, Captain Reynolds and his squadron were beginning to understand their advantage. It wasn't about firepower. It was about precision and unpredictability. "Stay loose, stay low," Reynolds ordered over the comms. His voice was steady, but there was a hint of exhilaration beneath it. They had survived the first wave, and now it was their turn to go on the offensive. The Vicks ships might have been equipped with shields that could deflect energy-based attacks, but those same shields struggled to counter kinetic rounds, missiles and bullets that relied on speed and force. Reynolds coordinated a new formation. His squadron fanned out, flying in tight, unpredictable patterns. The Vicks plasma fire continued to rain down, but it was unfocused, unable to pin them down. The jets, small and agile, darted between the massive alien ships like mosquitoes around a lumbering predator. One moment they were on the horizon, the next they were diving beneath the clouds, out of sight. "Engage at will," Reynolds commanded, his voice crackling through the headsets. The squadron had trained for years on advanced dogfighting tactics, and now those maneuvers were being put to the ultimate test. They began to hit back. Jets soared in high, almost grazing the massive energy shields of the Vicks warships, before diving sharply and letting loose a barrage of missiles. The missiles slammed into the shields, causing minor ripples. At first, the Vicks commanders laughed. This was nothing, these weapons couldn't possibly breach their defenses. But then something changed. The jets weren't retreating. They kept up the pressure, wave after wave of coordinated attacks. Reynolds led a group in a steep dive, heading straight for one of the smaller Vicks ships. The plasma cannons fired, narrowly missing them as they twisted through the air. At the last second, they broke formation, scattering in multiple directions. The Vicks ship hesitated, its automated systems unable to process which target to follow. In that moment of indecision, Reynolds launched his missile. It wasn't a high-tech energy weapon. It wasn't even new. But it was fast, and it was aimed with precision. The missile shot through the air, hitting the Vicks ship at a vulnerable point, right where its shields were weakest. The explosion was small at first, but then it grew, swallowing the ship in a ball of fire. For a second, everything was silent. And then the Vicks vessel began to fall from the sky. The command ship was filled with stunned silence. One of their warships, destroyed by a primitive missile? It was unthinkable. The Vicks commanders were no longer laughing. They were scrambling, shouting orders, frantically trying to adapt to this new threat. Their overconfidence had been their downfall. The human pilots, now sensing a shift in momentum, pressed their advantage. They had found a weakness in the Vicks defenses, and they were exploiting it relentlessly. Another squadron moved in, firing missiles in quick succession. The Vicks ships struggled to keep up, their plasma cannons firing wildly in all directions but hitting nothing. One by one, the Vicks ships started to falter. Their shields, designed to withstand energy attacks, were struggling against the sheer physical force of the human weapons. More missiles found their marks, and more ships began to fall. On the Vicks flagship, panic began to spread. The commanders, so sure of their victory just hours ago, were now desperately trying to come up with new strategies. But the more they tried to adjust, the more the humans outmaneuvered them. It wasn't supposed to be this way. The humans were supposed to be inferior, easy to conquer. But their tactics were baffling. Their unpredictability was something the Vicks had never encountered before. Captain Reynolds and his squadron kept up the pressure. Every maneuver was calculated, every missile strike designed to exploit the Vicks' vulnerabilities. He could see the panic in their movements now. The once unstoppable fleet was slowing, struggling to adapt to the human way of combat. "They're not invincible," Reynolds said to his team, a note of triumph in his voice. "Keep pushing." The Vicks, once arrogant and overconfident, were now on the defensive. They had underestimated humanity's ingenuity, and now they were paying the price. The battlefield had shifted, and the humans were no longer just defending, they were winning. The Vicks commanders, now fully aware that their automated systems were failing, began to feel a creeping sense of desperation. For the first time in millennia, they had to consider the unthinkable, taking manual control of their ships. They prided themselves on their superior technology, systems that were supposed to be foolproof. But these primitive humans had exposed a flaw, one they hadn't anticipated. Manual control was a relic of a past they thought they'd evolved beyond, but now it seemed like the only option. With grim determination, they activated their most advanced warships. These were the pride of the Vicks fleet, outfitted with their deadliest weapons, plasma cannons that could level cities in a single blast, energy fields that could withstand even the most brutal of assaults. This was their last, desperate bid to crush Earth's defenses and prove their dominance once and for all. The commanders gave the order to push forward, directing their warships into Earth's atmosphere, ready to annihilate anything in their path. On the ground, humanity braced for the onslaught. Every defense system was primed, every pilot was in position. But instead of fear, there was now a sense of purpose. The Vicks might have advanced ships and weapons, but the human pilots had something far more valuable: ingenuity. They had been underestimated, written off as primitive, and that mistake had given them the upper hand. The Vicks ships descended through the clouds, plasma cannons glowing ominously as they locked onto their targets. But the human squadrons, led by the best pilots Earth had to offer, were ready. They had studied the Vicks' weaknesses, learned their patterns, and now they were about to strike. Captain Reynolds, at the helm of the lead squadron, gave the signal. His team spread out across the landscape, diving into valleys, skimming over mountains, and using the natural terrain to confuse the Vicks targeting systems. While the Vicks had the power, the human pilots had the agility. They turned Earth's geography into a weapon, darting in and out of cover, never staying still long enough for the Vicks to get a clear shot. From above, the Vicks commanders watched in disbelief. How were these humans still alive? Their most advanced warships should have obliterated the jets by now. But every time a plasma cannon fired, the jets disappeared, hidden behind the mountains or under the clouds. The Vicks ships, massive and unwieldy, struggled to track the smaller, faster human jets. What was meant to be a quick victory had turned into a nightmare. In a final attempt to regain control of the battle, the Vicks commanders decided to deploy their flagship, the largest and most powerful warship in their fleet. Its arrival was meant to inspire fear, to show the humans that resistance was futile. But instead, it only strengthened their resolve. The human pilots knew that if they could take down the flagship, the entire Vicks fleet would fall into disarray. Reynolds' squadron was chosen for the mission. It was a high-risk, high-reward plan, one that required precision and bravery. The goal was simple: disable the flagship's core systems, rendering it vulnerable to a coordinated strike. But getting close enough to the flagship was a challenge in itself. It was heavily armed, with defenses that could obliterate anything within its vicinity. Undeterred, Reynolds led his team into the heart of the battle. They flew in tight formation, dodging plasma fire and weaving through the chaos of the Vicks fleet. The flagship loomed ahead, an imposing fortress in the sky, but the human jets pressed forward. Reynolds, always calm under pressure, guided his team through the barrage. They knew that one mistake could be fatal, but there was no turning back. As they approached the flagship, the Vicks commanders, now fully aware of the human threat, scrambled to respond. They frantically issued orders, trying to counter the jet's movements, but it was too late. The human pilots, using every bit of skill and creativity they had, executed a daring maneuver that brought them directly into the flagship's blind spot. With pinpoint accuracy, Reynolds fired the first missile, hitting the flagship's vulnerable underbelly. The explosion rocked the massive ship, and for the first time, the Vicks realized they were in real danger. The human jets pressed their attack, launching a series of coordinated strikes that crippled the flagship's main systems. Inside the command center, chaos erupted. The Vicks commanders, who had always believed in the infallibility of their technology, were now at each other's throats. Accusations flew, blame was assigned, but none of it mattered. Their arrogance had blinded them to the reality of the battle, and now they were paying the price. The human pilots had turned the tide, not through brute force, but through intelligence and adaptability, traits the Vicks had dismissed as irrelevant. As the flagship began to falter, losing altitude and power, the rest of the Vicks fleet fell into disarray. Without their central command, the ships were vulnerable. The human pilots, sensing victory, pressed their advantage. One by one, the Vicks warships began to fall, each explosion a reminder of the cost of their hubris. The Vicks had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest, but they had been defeated not by superior technology, but by the resilience and creativity of the human spirit. As the flagship plummeted towards the ocean, the human pilots flew back toward their base, knowing they had accomplished what many had thought impossible. The Vicks, once so confident in their superiority, had been brought low by the very species they had underestimated. And as the last of their warships crumbled, it became clear to both sides, the true strength of humanity lay not in their weapons, but in their ability to adapt, to fight with heart, and to never back down, even in the face of overwhelming odds. As the final stages of the battle unfolded, it was clear that the Vicks forces were on the brink of collapse. The once unstoppable alien warships, crippled by relentless strikes from human fighter jets, began to falter. What started as an invasion fueled by arrogance had transformed into a desperate struggle for survival for the Vicks. They had underestimated Earth, assuming that primitive jets could never stand against their superior technology, but now the tables had turned. Human pilots, emboldened by their successes, continued to press their advantage. With each pass, they exploited the weaknesses they had identified in the Vicks defense systems, landing precision strikes that brought down even the most formidable alien vessels. The battlefield was a chaotic dance of plasma fire and missile trails, but the humans maintained their focus, executing maneuvers with unmatched precision. The Vicks, who had entered Earth's atmosphere with supreme confidence, were now caught in a nightmare they couldn't escape. The lead pilot, Captain Reynolds, issued his final orders, coordinating the remaining squadrons in a perfectly timed assault that shattered the Vicks' last line of defense. The aliens, realizing their defeat, attempted a retreat. Ships that had once loomed large over Earth now turned tail, desperately trying to escape the planet's atmosphere. It was an unmistakable sign of surrender. The once proud Vicks, demoralized and broken, abandoned their conquest. The retreat was chaotic. Ships collided as the Vicks commanders, overwhelmed with fear, scrambled to withdraw. The surviving human pilots watched as the alien fleet dispersed, stunned by the sight of such a hasty and unorganized retreat. What had been an insurmountable enemy just hours ago was now in full retreat, their belief in their superiority shattered by the unyielding spirit of humanity. As the last of the Vicks ships vanished from Earth's sky, the battlefield grew quiet. The human pilots, weary but triumphant, returned to their bases. The once burning atmosphere now cleared, leaving behind only the wreckage of the battle. Earth had won. Against all odds, with only their seemingly outdated fighter jets and the sheer force of will, humanity had stood firm and emerged victorious. At the heart of the victory, Captain Reynolds stood as a symbol of everything the Vicks had failed to understand about humans. While the aliens had relied on their advanced technology, it was human creativity, adaptability, and sheer determination that had carried the day. In the debriefing room, surrounded by his fellow pilots, Reynolds reflected on the battle. The Vicks had dismissed them as primitives, and in doing so, had sealed their own fate. They had underestimated not just Earth's capabilities, but humanity's relentless spirit. As the human pilots were celebrated as heroes, their names etched into history, the broader implications of the victory began to sink in. Earth had proven itself in a way that no alien race could have predicted. The Vicks, once arrogant conquerors, had retreated in disgrace, forced to confront their own hubris. But more importantly, word of the battle spread quickly across the galaxy. Alien civilizations that had once viewed humanity with indifference, or even disdain, began to take notice. They saw not a species defined by its technology, but one driven by innovation and tenacity. This victory was more than just the defense of Earth. It was a statement to the universe that humanity was not to be trifled with. They were more than the sum of their weapons and machinery. Where the Vicks had relied on brute force and automated systems, humans had shown the value of strategic thinking and quick adaptation. It was a lesson that would resonate across the stars. In the aftermath, Earth's leaders sent a clear message to the galactic community: humanity would not bow to invaders, no matter how advanced. They had proven that strength did not come from technology alone, but from the will to survive, to outthink, and to outmaneuver even the most advanced adversaries. The galaxy, once blind to Earth's potential, now saw them as a rising force, one that commanded respect. The lead pilot, standing before the cheering crowds, knew this was only the beginning. Humanity had earned its place on the galactic stage, not through brute strength or superior technology, but through resilience and heart. The Vicks had come to conquer and had left in defeat. Other alien species, who had once looked down on humanity, would now be forced to reevaluate their assumptions. The victory over the Vicks wasn't just a battle won, it was a declaration. Humans weren't defined by the weapons they wielded, but by their ingenuity and spirit. The galaxy now knew this truth, and as the stars watched, humanity stood taller, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. And somewhere, in the far reaches of the galaxy, new eyes turned toward Earth, not with scorn, but with newfound respect. The humans, once deemed primitive, had shown that they could not only survive in a universe filled with danger but thrive, proving that they were a force to be reckoned with.